senior Republicans. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, was on Mrs. May's plane. First, though, to Washington and Kylie Morris. Kylie.
John, Donald Trump has just spoken in Philadelphia, expressing excitement at his meeting with the Prime Minister, saying Britain wants to talk trade, but as he has no Commerce Secretary, a dig at the Democrats who are delaying his cabinet appointments, he says he'll be dealing with it personally himself. He's dealing with quite a lot today, it must be said. Fallout from his comments on torture last night. What seems like, as you say, the breakdown of another important alliance, this time with Mexico over the wall, and high-level departures in the State Department. Some of America's best and brightest diplomats among them. Flying on Air Force One for the first time, Donald Trump arrived in Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, to make a special relationship even more special, according to the White House. Theresa May is the first foreign leader to meet the new president, the second just cancelled. President Peña Nieto of Mexico, angered by President Trump's insistence his country should pay for a new border wall, won't be coming next week. If President Trump needs advice on how to handle the snub, he might need to start making calls, since the entire senior management team in the State Department, which handles America's foreign affairs, seems in upheaval. It's not immediately clear whether those who've left resigned or were pushed. The official response, this is part of a normal transition. As career diplomats, they were sworn to carry out the new policies of the United States overseas, including the wall, and defending comments like those from Donald Trump last night that now he's president, he still thinks torture is an effective option.
Does it work? Does torture work? And the answer was yes. I want to do everything within the bounds of what you're allowed to do legally. But do I feel it works? Absolutely, I feel it works.
Those views not only put pressure on diplomats and allies like Britain, who rely heavily on intelligence gathered by America, but also on President Trump's own party. At their Republican retreat in Philadelphia, senior members were sticking with the law.
Well, I think the director of the CIA has made it clear he's going to follow the law, and I believe virtually all of my members are comfortable with the state of the law on that issue now.
And torture is illegal. And torture's not legal. And we agree with it not being legal.
The Republican Party is caught in the slipstream of the bold agenda of a new president. 4 working days, and President Trump has already signed executive orders on Obamacare, freezing federal jobs, the wall, and other moves to stem illegal immigration.
Since taking office, I have taken major contractual steps to restore the rule of law and to return power to everyday Americans. And even though it's only a few days, we've done it in record numbers.
It is the speed with which the president has moved on his campaign promises that is delighting his supporters, but shaking his civil service.
I think if we had just inaugurated a President Jeb Bush, a President Marco Rubio, you wouldn't see these officials feel that they have to leave.
Matthew Miller is a former spokesman for the Department of Justice. He says some movement among senior officials is normal, but this is not.
Former colleagues of mine at the Justice Department that I've talked to are facing this same tough choice now, and I think you'll see some of them will leave immediately, and some of them will probably stay and try to fight from the inside, and then eventually just give up within a year or 2 years when they decide it's too much.
In the past hour, the U.S. Border Patrol chief, on the front line of President Trump's war on illegal immigration, has left his position.
Well, now let's go back to Gary Gibbon in Philadelphia. Gary, you were on the plane there with Mrs. May. She's arrived amid great controversy about torture and much else. What cooks?
Yes, as if things weren't uncomfortable enough and nerve-wracking enough for Theresa May coming over here, the daughter of a home county's vicar, coming to see this billionaire property developer. Donald Trump added to the discomfort and the nerves, really, by doing an interview overnight in which he said that he supported torture. Inevitably, we asked Theresa May on the plane, was there any change in British policy? Would she be bringing it up with him when she meets Donald Trump tomorrow? She said no change in British policy, and she noted that he hadn't actually changed American policy. He just, my words not hers, blurted something out. And I think that's quite interesting in the sense that government is constantly looking around to see, trying to divine what it is that Donald Trump is genuinely going to do and what it is that he's just going to talk about and what it is that he can be stopped from doing. And it's very interesting that round the corner from here, there she is talking to Republican congressmen in an hour or so's time and congresswomen, because she wants them perhaps to be a check and balance in the great spirit of the American Constitution on a president who won't always be doing things that she wants. One area in particular there where her audience round the corner, you see a few protesters around me now, this is Donald Trump's first visit from the Capitol, so they're not missing the opportunity to demonstrate against him. Quite a lot of the Republicans in there are in favour of free trade, and of course Donald Trump parades his protectionist loyalties quite openly.
Start tomorrow at the White House. But what's interesting is on the plane, we gather that when she was asked what it is about Donald Trump that makes her think she can get on, she said opposites sometimes get on, or something like that. How will they get on?
That's right. It was slightly flirtatious delivery. She said, haven't you ever noticed sometimes opposites attract? And I think she's just trying to bluster her way through an awkward question, to be completely opposite with you. I can't see this really hitting it off as a personal relationship, but she wants it to be a really solid political relationship. I suspect she's going to start the meeting by handing over the formal invitation from Her Majesty to come over later in the year, perhaps this summer, and have all the trappings of a royal visit, a state visit laid on for him. But she's going to try and build a personal relationship with him as well. And I think she's going to be really careful about picking the battles that she can genuinely move him on a bit. I think she's going to try and get him to say something strong and supportive about NATO, but not necessarily picking some other battles in this very first short introductory meeting.
Gary Gibbon in Philadelphia. Chris.
So where now for that special relationship at a time of Trump's America First? With me now, Labour's Shadow Attorney General, Baroness Shami Chakrabarti, and the former Conservative Chancellor, Ken Clarke. Ken Clarke, how risky is it for Theresa May to be going off to be his best friend and the first person to meet him?
Oh, it's for quite an important coup to be the first person to go and all the rest of it, but I think she will be careful. I mean, it's very important, it is for any British government, that we have as good a relationship as we can have with the American president of the day, the American
regardless of who he is.
Well, it's got to vary. What we mustn't do is revert to being Washington's poodle, which is how half the world regards us anyway. And what she mustn't do is repeat the mistakes of the Blair-George W. Bush relationship, when Blair just got involved in disastrous decisions like invading Iraq, and our security people did get compromised by turning a blind eye to, and certainly sometimes getting involved with, the things that American intelligence were then doing, which I don't think they want to do now, the waterboarding, the illegal rendition, when quite obviously things were done which should not have been done. We've got to be a firm ally, but actually, knowing Theresa as I do, I have no doubt that personally she's quite sound, for example, on torture. In no way is Donald Trump going to browbeat her into
will she
allowing
bring it
our
up?
intelligence services.
Will it be one of these
so.
things with the Chinese where
so.
you just don't mention it? Or will she say, no, these are the things we disagree
Well,
on?
we'll never know, but she's got to bring some things up. I mean, it just happens to be the thing of the day. It's not the most important thing. Our intelligence services have learnt their lesson. They do now comply with the law. If they're not, they are fooling everybody rather well. What I hope she also brings up is NATO and the fact that Vladimir Putin is a geopolitical enemy to people in Europe, including the British, and we do want some reassurances that whilst you try and get a better relationship with Russia going again, we are safe in being protected against, helped to protect ourselves against any more adventurism by Putin. They're more important things than the chat on the plane about torture and Donald Trump's latest off-the-cuff, outrageous remark about torture.
Well, I mean, funnily enough, of all the things Jeremy Corbyn disagrees with Donald Trump on, he probably agrees with him on NATO, doesn't he?
No, I don't think that's the case. I agree with much of what Ken has said, but I'm a bit less sanguine because what he's calling a coup is an enormous responsibility. If you're going to go and be the first, and by the way, he's not just... It isn't just an off-the-cuff remark about torture. He's been talking about waterboarding and worse all through his presidential campaign.
So what should she do?
I think she's decided to go. Call it a coup, call it a risk, call it a responsibility. She has to speak up and she has to speak up publicly. She can be polite, she can be dignified, she can be a stateswoman, but she has to be a critical friend.
What would that achieve? I mean, Jeremy Corbyn tweeted a list of things she should, she should raise the NHS, she should raise torture, she should raise all these things that she disagrees with him on. What would that achieve?
You can have a joke if you like, Krishnan.
No, I'm asking you what it would achieve. I'm not joking. He's the one who's laughing at you.
Well, I don't think Donald Trump would know what the NHS was, would he? I think it was Obamacare.
If you are the first premier of another country to visit this man who is an out racist, an out misogynist, who has insulted half the human race, you have an enormous responsibility to speak out. She has, as a woman, I'm not playing party politics with this. She can't just rely on the fact that she's a woman to think that that's a statement enough in itself. She has to speak out. She has to speak to him privately, but also has to come out and say that there was robust discussion about torture, about the rights of women in the US, in the UK, and around the world. And if she doesn't, us women in particular, but I think all sorts of other people and minority groups will feel very let down.
What would happen if she did that?
No, I think...
Apart from winning some support...
I think this is a symbolic visit, really. They won't cover all that much in this visit. And they've got to cover the key things. And you've got to bear in mind, she's Prime Minister. She has said, during the American election campaign, some of the things about Trump's views on women that Charmy is saying. I have not the slightest doubt what Theresa May's opinions are on some of Trump's attitudes towards women. They're the same as Charmy's. But as Prime Minister...
Then why go and suck up to him? That's the point, isn't it? If you disagree with him on all these things...
It is key to our security and our political stability that we have a good working relationship with America. And what she's got to do is establish that despite the obvious gulfs in political views between her and Donald Trump, there couldn't be two more different sort of politicians, that we are ready to be an ally, a supportive ally. We think we're mutually dependent on each other for quite a lot of intelligence and security, and we're prepared to get engaged in foreign policy things.
But that's why the torture point is so important.
She's got to concentrate on NATO, Putin and the Middle East. She hasn't time to start arguing
Ken, you're
women's
right
rights
about security, and you're right about this very close intelligence relationship. And you were right in what you said before about what happened when we, as the British, got mixed up in torture. If she does not speak out unequivocally and make it clear that she's made those remarks to Mr. Trump in person as well, there will be a real concern that we're going to go down that path again.
If he turns out to be a total disaster and the scourge of the free world, she's going to regret this visit, isn't she?
No,
only if she doesn't speak out. Now, I hope springs eternal with me. She's made this trip. I want to hear the nature of the speech at the retreat, and we want to see the optics of the press conference. And it won't work. It won't work unless she demonstrates that, yes, she's a friend of the United States, but she's a critical friend of Donald Trump, and there is a lot to criticise at the moment.
Now, while you're both with us, I have to raise the question of the Article 50 bill that is going through the House of Commons. Labour has faced its first resignation. Tulip Siddiq has quit, saying she would rather oppose a hard Brexit from the backbenches. I mean, the irony here is that we have Ken Clarke, who said he's against hard Brexit, and he's going to vote against the government. Labour opposes hard Brexit, but he's going to vote with the government.
Well,
the reason
let's get Shami Chakrabarty's response.
I have colleagues who are democratically elected, unlike me, who have really, really painful anguish, because on the one hand, they know that the British people have voted one way, but they've got very different circumstances in their constituencies, and that has got to be understood. Labour is the most populist political party in the UK. We're the biggest political party in the UK. The UK has been split over this issue, so guess what? We represent people in both camps. And that is, some people call it a bind, I call it a responsibility.
But it's your position that makes no sense. That's the point,
I don't agree, because we are Democrats. This referendum, which I was against, I was against the Brexit. I campaigned to remain, but I'm a Democrat and I have to respect this decision. What we want to do now is to move on from whether you trigger Article 50 and begin negotiations, and move on to what kind of Britain we're going to be.
Well, Europe's always caused the great neurosis in British politics because it splits both parties. And our conventional tribal party politics which is breaking down anyway because the public are losing interest in it, it doesn't match the event. My position's so simple. I mean, it's very straightforward. For 50 years, I still believe that the country is made more powerful politically, better off economically by being in the European Union. People would fall about laughing if I cast a vote in favour of Britain leaving the European Union. I think referendums are a dreadful way of deciding such a thing, a huge broad-brush question. I thought the campaign was pathetic on both sides. Anybody wanting to find out more about the European Union, the campaign found out nothing. So, but I've several times tried to persuade the public to vote for Conservative governments, and in their wisdom, more of the public have voted Labour, and I've found myself in Parliament facing a Labour government. Now, nobody ever has told me that my duty is to obey the commands of the public. I must now support Labour's policies on nationalisation. I'm an enemy of the people if I start using my judgment as to what's in the national interest and the interest of future generations in casting a vote. Now, the people who signed up to referendums are all over the place, and I would recommend to Jeremy not to make a very serious three-line whip. He never took any notice of three-line whips. Don't have a three-line whip. Let all the Labour members wrestle with the dilemma that individually each of them face.
Ken Clarke, Baroness Shami Chakrabarti, thank you very much.
And we'll have more from the United States later. We're live from Philadelphia again and debating Trump's record so far with senior figures from both parties. Now, the government has published the bill that will trigger the UK's departure from the EU, as you've just heard. It's very short on detail. MPs will get just 5 days to debate it. But it was Jeremy Corbyn's decision to order all Labour MPs to back it that prompted the resignation of one of his shadow ministers this afternoon. Fatima Manji is in Westminster. Fatima, go for it.
Yes, John. Well, here it is in its full glory, about 137 words or 5.5 tweets, as one MP put it. It is a bill that the government has been forced to publish by the Supreme Court, which means that Parliament has to decide if it's going to confer power on the Prime Minister to begin that process of Brexit. Now, it's obviously very short. MPs will debate it on Tuesday and Wednesday. The government says it is fast-tracking this process so that it can begin the process of triggering Article 50 before the end of March, a self-imposed deadline by the government. Now, all of this is causing frustration among MPs who say the scant detail and the short time that they're getting to discuss this, they'll only have 5 days, is outrageous. One MP, Chuka Amuna, says the government is now acting like an elective dictatorship. Here is one MP, Labour's Ben Bradshaw, who will be voting against this bill.
I think it's completely outrageous for the government to restrict debate on this, the single biggest issue this country has faced in our lifetimes that will affect generations to come, and they're giving us 3 days to discuss it. That is a contempt of Parliament, and I think it's a real pity that Labour are going along with this.
And it is in Labour ranks that the most trouble has actually begun. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has told his MPs that they cannot block Brexit. He's imposing a three-line whip, meaning they have to vote for this bill. That has already prompted one resignation. Tulip Siddiq, MP for Hampstead and Kilburn, early years shadow minister, has resigned, saying her MPs voted for Remain, her constituents voted for Remain, and therefore she cannot back Brexit and she wants to fight it from the backbenches. Now, Labour's in a difficult position. They've got Leave constituents and Remain constituents, and their MPs are divided. Expect more resignations, and Jeremy Corbyn is putting out a call for unity, asking his MPs to come together.
I say to everyone, unite around the important issues of jobs, economy, security, rights, justice, those issues, and we'll frame that relationship with Europe in the future. Outside the EU.
Now, Labour has tabled amendments to this bill to try and soften that hard Brexit, but rebellion in the Labour ranks is still ongoing. I've spoken tonight to at least one shadow minister who says next week they will be voting against this bill and will take the consequences. So rebellion has been delayed but not entirely averted.
Now, Boris Johnson has hinted at a major shift, well, in fact, a reversal in British policy towards the Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad, suggesting he could be allowed to run for re-election if there's a peace settlement. The Foreign Secretary told the International Relations Select Committee in the Lords that now Donald Trump was in power, everyone should reassess their position on Syria.
It is our view that Bashar al-Assad should go. It's been our long-standing position. But as I've said, we are open-minded about how that happens and the timescale on which that happens. The old policy, I'm afraid to say, doesn't command much confidence either.
People taking their own lives, attacks, self-harm, have soared to record levels in prisons across England and Wales. New figures show that there were a total of 354 deaths behind bars last year, while assaults on staff went up by 2/5. The Justice Secretary Liz Truss said that the government was taking action, but admitted the problem wouldn't be solved in weeks or months. And campaigners say the prison crisis is fast spiralling out of control, as our social affairs editor Jackie Long now reports.
Dean would always go out his way to help people, and then when he really needed the help, it just wasn't there.
For every death in prison, there's a family left behind. Dean Saunders had never been in trouble before when, during his first ever attack of paranoia, he tried to stab his brother, then cut his own throat. His father, Mark, stepped in to stop him and was stabbed in the stomach himself. Dean was put on remand for attempted murder in Chelmsford Prison. No hospital bed was available. He electrocuted himself in his cell just over a fortnight later.
I think it's the bowling. I think, you know, I said to you, didn't I, if he'd have been an animal, he would have got better treatment.
It's like I said, it's a horrible thought, but if I didn't save him that night, then he would have died in my arms. Amongst people he loved, instead of
feeling abandoned by us because we couldn't get to him.
And in a cold, lonely cell, because that's all we done, and had 2 weeks of, well, torture.
An inquest just last week concluded Dean was the victim of multiple failings by the prison service and healthcare provider there, Care UK. Not least, a decision to reduce observation levels on Dean because of financial considerations. For his parents, today's figures leave them sad, but certainly not surprised.
It hasn't exploded overnight. This has been festering for years and gradually getting worse. And it's got to that point now where they're going to have to, it's going to cost them a lot of money to put it right, but it wouldn't have.
The figures, the safety in custody statistics, show deaths in prison at record levels. 119 people took their own life behind bars, up by nearly a third. There was a 23% increase in the number of incidents of self-harm, and violence in prisons continued to escalate, with assaults in custody up by 31% to a record 25,000.
We don't need more reviews, we don't need more evidence. This government have got to act, and a starting point is a dramatic reduction in the prison population. Because if the government don't act, we're going to see this scandalous death toll continue.
In a statement this evening, the Ministry of Justice acknowledged deaths in prison were too high and said it was working to bring the numbers down. It said we are investing £100 million annually to boost the front line by 2,500 officers. These are long-standing issues that will not be resolved in weeks or months, but our whole-scale reforms will lay the groundwork to transform our prisons. Dean's family say they'll campaign until that transformation is a reality, and prisoners like Dean are kept safe.
There was no value on his life. To them, there was just the charge that was on his head, and he wasn't looked at as a person. I see it as he was looked at as a number, another prisoner, and not a life at all. He was our person, he was our family member, and he deserved so much more. He had so much life left to live, and it was just robbed.
Today's figures are a stark reminder of how much change is needed, but how quickly that change will come is less easy to predict.
Now, the UK economy has confounded all that talk of a downturn after the Brexit vote, ending 2016 with another spurt of growth. The increase was fuelled by strong consumer spending, especially retail and travel, though industrial production and building were flat. So is it a solid trend, or is the strength of the consumer too dependent on running up more debt? Here's our business editor, Siobhan Kennedy.
So the economy seems to be on firmer foundations than many predicted.
This Reading building firm did experience a post-Brexit wobble. But things picked up pretty swiftly, and sales of their mid-market new builds were strong right up and through the traditionally quiet Christmas period.
There was an immediate reaction like there was in the stock market. There was a bit of worry, a bit of a lull. But then sooner or later, very quickly, people realise life goes on. There's still a demand for housing in this area, particularly this level. There's still competition to buy. So it's been very good since then.
He didn't even need a show home for this cul-de-sac of flats and houses on the outskirts of Reading, just down the road from the Prime Minister's own Thames Valley home. One open day and the majority was sold off plan, though he does worry whether it'll be quite so easy come March, when Brexit talks begin in earnest.
We're now slightly worried when Article 50 is invoked. There may be another sort of setback. People may sit and take stock. But again, the economy is very buoyant in this area.
Overall, the construction sector grew a little at the end of last year, but it's still Britain's shops, restaurants and hotels that did the real heavy lifting. In many ways, the story of our building firm mirrors exactly what's happened in the wider economy. A brief blip after the Brexit vote, followed by a return to normal activity soon after, right through to the end of the year. Which begs one question: did the forecasters get it wrong, or is this simply economic pain being delayed? Because if today's data shows us anything, it's that the consumer is driving economic growth. And with inflation rising and wages likely to be squeezed, will they simply rein in their spending? How are you feeling about spending?
Well, trying to rein it in, yeah, because I am worried about the future. I need to keep much savings as you can. I want to keep any money that you've got in the bank if possible.
It's scary, you know, everybody's just slowing down because of what's happening, especially with Brexit and all this sort of thing as well. Everybody's a bit, let's not do anything.
Why should people stop spending? Because it's not that bad, is it?
Well, just because inflation's rising and
Yeah,
but maybe you're not feeling it.
It's
That's
not
my
serious.
question.
Yeah, it's not serious, though, is it? Not like everybody thought it was going to be.
Everybody would include this man, the Chancellor. He was up the road at Microsoft's UK headquarters today talking to apprentices. Quarterly growth of 0.6% above estimates should have him basking in glory. But the irony for Philip Hammond is that he was one of those warning of economic turbulence post-Brexit.
Chancellor, you signalled last year that the economy would be in for a roller coaster, I think you called it. If anything, these figures show today that the opposite is true. Is it now time to admit that you got that wrong?
The economy is very resilient, and I'm very pleased about that, and that is due to the action that has been taken since the Brexit vote in June to support the economy with monetary stimulus provided by the Bank of England, and then a modest fiscal stimulus and a reconfirmation of our plans to bring the public finances back into balance.
But there's been no roller coaster, so are you prepared to admit that you got that wrong?
Well, I'm prepared to admit that the response that we've delivered to the referendum result has been successful. The predictions that were made before the referendum usually, in most cases, assumed no government intervention, no action in response.
But you didn't qualify that when you called it a roller coaster.
What we had was a significant response by the Bank of England early on, and a further response by the government at autumn statement.
And what of his threat to turn Britain into a low-tax centre if the UK doesn't get its way in the Brexit negotiations?
Doesn't that go against the grain of everything that you say about tax cheats and corporate responsibility?
It's about maintaining the competitiveness of our economy. And what I will say, and any responsible government would say, is that if we find that we are under pressure because we can't get access to our traditional markets, we will look at all the tools available to us in order to keep that economy competitive. Of course,
forgive me, tax has to be one of those big levers.
Of course, tax is one of the levers, but it's not the only lever, and it shouldn't be overemphasised.
So today's growth figures are stronger than expected, but Mr Hammond knows the job's not finished. Consumer sentiment could turn, and of course those negotiations with Europe haven't even started.
Siobhan Kennedy reporting now. A new president has been given a hero's welcome this evening, Gambia's leader, Adama Barrow. He's finally returned home, declaring he's happy, and a happy man promising to get the ball rolling. His homecoming was made possible after the former leader, Yahya Jammeh, fled into exile, although he's left the country's economy practically bankrupt. We're joined now by our chief correspondent, Alex Thompson. Alex, a rare moment.
It is one of those moments, rare moments indeed, John, when we pause in this studio to consider a situation of unmitigated peace, joy, and a democratic transition of power in the heart of West Africa. It's an extraordinary moment. Let's have a look. Some pictures now. This is the man himself, Adama Barrow. I know we in the Western media always say this, but it's a lovely fact. He was once a security guard at the Argos store in the Holloway Road in North London, became a property developer, and there he is back. He's been in exile for about a week, 10 days in next door Dakar in Senegal, awaiting West African peacekeepers to stabilise the situation. But the fact of the matter is the transition of power, it could have been a bloodbath, frankly, and 2 weeks ago it looked as if it may very well be that. The fly past there, or one jet fly past, but he's there, he's in power, he's calling for all Gambians to come back now and rebuild this country. Yes, the coffers are empty. Yes, Yahya Jammeh, the dictator of 22 years, fled with over $11 million, several Rolls Royces and Mercedes. But talk to Gambians, and a lot of them are saying tonight that's a reasonable price. It's a bit smelly around the edges, the deal, but it's that versus a bloodbath or even one life lost on the streets of the Gambia. So an extraordinary transition of power.
Alex Thompson, Krish.
The former Labour MP, Tam Diel, has died, aged 84, after a short illness. The 11th Baronet, Sir Thomas Diel, known as Tam, served as a Member of Parliament for 43 years, first elected in 1962 for the West Lothian constituency, a place which became synonymous with his objections to Scottish devolution and whether non-English MPs should be able to vote upon English-only issues. He was best known for his dogged questioning of Mrs Thatcher over the sinking of the Belgrano.
The Royal Bank of Scotland is heading for its 9th annual loss in a row after taking a £3 billion hit over the potential cost of a toxic bond mis-selling scandal in the United States. The total put aside for the packaging of toxic mortgages is now £6.7 billion. In the last 6 years, RBS, which is 72% owned by the state, has had to set aside around £23 billion for misconduct, including PPI claims, LIBOR, and the US mortgage scandal.
Well, back now to tonight's main news, and Donald Trump is still in Philadelphia, where Republicans have been huddled at their group retreat. Ironically, it's one of the sanctuary cities which the president has targeted for offering safe havens to undocumented immigrants. Our international editor, Lindsay Hilson, is there.
President Trump says he's going to return power to the people in the states, but not the cities, because they're the centre of opposition to him. Places like here, Philadelphia, where he is today, it's a bastion of women's rights, gay rights, immigrant rights. And that is going to be one of the major fights of this administration. Yesterday, he signed executive orders against sanctuary cities like Philadelphia, where the police routinely refuse to cooperate with federal authorities to deport undocumented migrants.
At the Philadelphia Immigrant Rights Project, Juntos, a new generation of activists is learning how their new president is signing executive orders that may change their lives.
He just grabs a pen and signs them, and it becomes a temporary law.
They're reading the New York Times.
Mr. Trump, whose campaign rallies featured chants of "Build a Wall," has instead described many undocumented immigrants as criminals who must be found and forcibly removed from the United States.
But it's not all sad. I see your faces. How are you feeling right now?
Shocked.
Scared.
Frustrated.
Frustrated?
It's personal. 15-year-old Cindy is here legally, but not her mother and father, who have no papers.
What about your parents, the fact that they're undocumented? Are you concerned or worried about that now?
I try not to be worried, but if it were to happen, I don't know what I would do. I'm lost. Like, sometimes I really want to help my parents and like do something, but it's really complicated, like how this system works. And I never like really put too much thought into what if they were actually deported.
Philadelphia's mayor, arriving for the auto show, says he'll fight such deportations, despite President Trump's order to withdraw federal funding from sanctuary cities like this that refuse to cooperate routinely with federal agencies deporting illegal migrants.
They're undocumented people. They're not illegal immigrants. They're undocumented human beings who have decided to live in Philadelphia, and we have a responsibility to keep them safe. Philadelphia has the lowest crime rate that it's had since 1979. So all of this assertion that somehow sanctuary cities are dangerous places are simply untrue.
But your policy is different from President Trump's policy. How are you going to resist?
There are methods that we have our congressional folks, we have the courts, we have lots of protections. This is not a dictatorship. This is a democracy.
Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, has one of America's fastest growing immigrant populations. 9% of the city's people arrived recently from Asia, Africa, Europe, and large numbers from Latin America. Geraldo and Teresa make a reasonable living from their taco stall. They came from Mexico nearly 30 years ago, but only got their papers last year. They fear President Trump.
Y él se le olvidó que también viene de raíces inmigrantes. Entonces,
he's forgotten that he also has immigrant roots. Maybe he doesn't know what an immigrant suffers. We know from our own experience because our son was deported and we've had to struggle to survive to make a living. As we would say, he can't imagine what it's like to walk in our shoes.
Como decimos, no se ponen en nuestros zapatos.
A town hall meeting on education for immigrant children attracts far larger numbers than expected. Councillors are listening to the fears of young people like Cindy.
We ask you to defend us today by, instead of putting money into criminalizing us, that you instead invest in supporting us and our parents. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you.
It's tough, isn't it?
Very.
You scared?
For me, no, but for my parents, I am scared for them, and I guess I am scared for like 11 million other undocumented people who are in America.
Undocumented migrants will be targeted in the time of Trump. And every family asks, will it be us?
Joining us from Washington now is Marianne Mendoza, a Trump supporter who applauds his hard line on immigration. But do you applaud his hard line on sanctuaries, Marianne?
Absolutely. And just listening to your previous report with the young girl who was afraid her parents came here years ago, I have no sympathy for them. They've been here 20, 25, 30 years. They know that they needed to get in line to become legal in this country. They have choices. My son was killed from somebody who came from their country. My son was a police officer in Mesa, Arizona. He was hit head on and killed on his way home from work one night by a person from their country. And my son no longer has any choices. I no longer have any choices of my life with my son. They have choices to take their children, go back to Mexico, and come back here legally. This is a strain on our country economically. And these sob stories from these people, they all know that they've come here illegally. Every country in this world has immigration laws, and because we now have a president who has chosen to stand up for Americans and enforce our immigration laws is not a reason for the backlash that is coming against President Trump. President Trump cares about Americans, and that's what needs to happen in this country.
But you're happy that their legal children would be allowed to stay?
If they're legal, they can stay. Their parents have to make the choice. Are they going to take them back home with them or not? And like I said, they have choices. They can still have phone calls with their children and email and make visits and see them. I don't have those choices anymore.
Can I ask you then, do you feel at this moment that your vote for Donald Trump and your support for him has already been vindicated?
Absolutely. My son's death has been vindicated, because he didn't deserve to die the way that he did. He was protecting people in this country. He went to a job every day and protected his community and got rid of drug dealers that were coming across the border from Mexico and kept his his beat, the beat that he was assigned to, he kept those people safe from these types of criminals.
Well, let me ask you something else, because
my son had to die.
There's something else that Mr. Trump has said. He's going to build his wall, and he's going to have Mexico pay for it. But tonight, we've obviously got the situation in which the president of Mexico has cancelled his visit and says there are no circumstances whatever, under which they will pay for it.
Do you know how much money goes back over the border every year from Mexicans here in the United States? Billions of dollars in remittance payments to their families. We spend billions of dollars a year supporting these illegals from other countries, whether it be food stamps, free health care, welfare, education. Any of the programs that we pay for these people is billions of dollars. Stop doing that and stop providing this free taxpayer benefits to these illegals who are in our country, and the wall will be paid for. It's a no-brainer. Mr. Trump is an intelligent man. And all of these news outlets that want to make out like he's an idiot and we don't know, he doesn't need to meet with the president of Mexico to get this figured out. He doesn't need to meet with the president of Mexico to make our country safe again.
But you will be perfectly happy. You will be perfectly happy. You will be perfectly happy if in the end you find yourself having to pay for the wall. It's that important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'd write a check for $500 today to get that wall built.
Marianne Mendoza, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, now we're joined from Berkeley in California by Professor Robert Reich, who served as a cabinet secretary under President Clinton. Robert Reich, thank you so much for joining us. I'm wondering really what you make of the first 5 days of President Trump's appearance. He is a change maker. Let's put it to you like that.
Yes, that's a charitable way of putting it. He is a change maker. Let's put it this way. A different way of putting it is that for those of us who feared the Trump presidency, all our fears have proven themselves to be quite well-founded, in the sense that Donald Trump is a xenophobe. He has put in place and is planning to put in place more and more policies that isolate the United States from the rest of the world. Last weekend, he was very clear with Europe that he doesn't care about the common market. He also said that, once again, he reiterated his position that he believes NATO is obsolete. He almost equated Angela Merkel with Vladimir Putin, which was astounding. Astounding to Europeans, obviously, but also astounding to those of us in the United States who follow foreign policy. But to use your word astounding, the truth is that over 60 million Americans found their circumstances such that they wanted this man and they wanted the change he promised. Yes, that's true. And I think that is testament to not only how bad their circumstances are relative to what they expected. That is, for the last 30 years, most Americans have not seen any increase in their wages or their standard of living adjusted for inflation. And the Democrats also have failed, and they've failed for every time the Democrats have had power, to do very much about this trajectory. The big business, big moneyed interests, both in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, have basically kept any change from happening of a sort that would have prevented this authoritarian demagogue from taking over. So we have nobody to blame but ourselves.
In all honesty, Robert Reich, surely what one can say is that your party lost its way. It became the party of the elite. You used to represent the working man and woman, but it came to be known as basically, the rich person's party. And that seems to be the division in the country. The people who've made money out of the banking crisis and the rest of it are voting for the Democrats, and the people who didn't are saying, oi, it's time we had a change.
They're saying, oi, they're saying we want a change. I think you've got it right, except there's a nuance that you've left out, which I think is still quite important. Barack Obama did try to do many things for the working class, the middle class, the lower middle class. He couldn't get done because Republicans in Congress would not let him get them done. And that is largely because the patrons of most Republicans in Congress also have a great deal of money. And if anything, the Democrats are more and have been pushing harder with regard to Medicare, Medicaid, the Obamacare, that is the Affordable Care Act, all kinds of things that would help average working people than have Republicans.
And are you confident that somebody can pick up those reins and rebuild the party and get back into power next time?
I'm not at all, and I worry about that a great deal. I think the Democrats are in terrible shape. Democrats, still, many of them I talk with, are in denial about just the fact that the Democratic Party is on life support.
On that terribly gloomy note, I'm afraid we're going to have to end it, but thank you very much indeed for joining us, Professor Reich.
Thanks very much.
And one PS to the Trump matters. The star of the Iranian film The Salesman, nominated for an Oscar, has said she will not be attending the Academy Awards ceremony in Los Angeles next month because of Donald Trump's plan to block entry to the United States for immigrants from a range of Muslim nations. Tarana Andarusa said the move was racist.
Well, a PPS, actually, because we haven't finished with Trump. After the break, Chinese whispers. The president has torn up most of America's foreign policy norms, leaving relations with China up in the air. We'll hear the view from Beijing. Now, he's ignoring Beijing's one China rule. He's torn up a trans-Pacific trade deal and railed against countries that destroy American jobs. Donald Trump's foreign policy is nothing if not unpredictable. So in this new world of shifting alliances, what's the view from Beijing? Kieran Jenkins is there.
Well, while the eyes of the world are on Washington and the early days of President Trump, every bit as important is what happens here in China. This relationship between the US and China that Barack Obama called the most important relationship on the planet is now very much up in the air. At this stage, we can't even say for sure if the future of that relationship will be cordial. Here in China, they are very conscious of the fact that during the campaign, in campaign mode, Donald Trump portrayed China as public enemy number 2 almost after ISIS, blaming China for stealing American jobs, for breaking international law, for unfair trading. He proposed huge tariffs on Chinese imports. He proposed reviewing the One China policy, potentially recognizing Taiwanese sovereignty. Now, an advisor to the Chinese government has told us that that would be non-negotiable. But it's Chinese New Year here, and in that New Year, there is an expectation, a realization that there will have to be some form of new relationship between China and the United States. They are hoping for the best, but they're preparing for the worst.
Like the grey Beijing air, what happens next between the US and China is not at all clear. The election of President Trump may change the fortunes of Chinese citizens in a way almost no other external event could.
For many decades, we've enriched foreign industry at the expense of American industry.
At his inauguration, Trump didn't need to name-check China. His words echoed attack lines lobbed at the Chinese throughout his campaign.
We must protect our borders from the ravages of other countries, making our products, stealing our companies, and destroying our jobs.
But in this country where real estate commercials share ad space with Communist Party slogans, Trump's inauguration was not broadcast live. America buys far more from China than it sells to them. Trump wants to redress that balance. He's threatened to slap 45% tariffs on Chinese products, a move that could provoke a trade war. The official Chinese government response has been muted, but state media has let rip. Zhao writes for the Global Times tablet.
Kieran.
His paper has called Trump arrogant, childish, and warned of revenge.
If we must say who is the winner, I think maybe China, in my opinion. Yeah. The message the China's government want to send to President Trump is that China will not be afraid of trade war.
All right, we're going to sign 3 memorandums.
But Trump's presidency may also bring opportunities. He's already withdrawn from a trade bloc conceived in part to curb Chinese influence in Asia. The Transatlantic Trade Partnership,
everyone knows what that means, right?
Didn't include China. It may gain most from it falling apart. In Davos last week, the unlikely sight of the Chinese president defending globalization. President Xi Jinping said protectionism was like locking yourself in a dark room.
Well, the message coming very clearly out of Beijing is that this is not a battle that China is either prepared or willing to lose. And they know they have some leverage, whether it's as a bridge to North Korea, absolutely vital to America's security interests, or the staggering amount of American debt that China holds. Only Japan is owed more by America than China is. And as Donald Trump surely knows, picking a fight with your banker is really a good idea.
And this banker has a navy. Here, a recent show of strength in the South China Sea. China has built military installations on artificial islands here, ruled illegal by an international tribunal. Trump's pick for Secretary of State said China should be barred from accessing them.
Hello.
Hi.
Much rests on how China would react. This man advises the Chinese state on foreign relations. The gist? It could get very messy.
You think it's tantamount to a declaration of war?
Yes, if they turn their words into actions by action. For example, if China's ships want to islands and they take action to stop, that means the declaration of war.
There may also, he says, be friction with the US over trade too.
We prepare two categories of measures. One category of measures is we want to make a compromise, and the other preparation is we have to prepare for war if Trump launched the trade war.
Ni hao. Hi, ni hao. This man's trade war is normally with the police, moving him on from his yogurt stand. But like many others here, he expects his president to come out on top.
No country can look away when another country is threatening its sovereignty. China cannot look away when others bully us.
The Chinese government this week again expressed its wish for cooperation. And yet, if it comes to a standoff, neither side will want to be seen to back down. Kieran Jenkins, Channel 4 News in Beijing.
Tonight's main news, Theresa May has arrived in the United States claiming she can forge a close working relationship with Donald Trump because opposites attract.
A bit like us, really.
No,
That's it for tonight.
We toil in the same vineyard.
Yeah.
With joy.
The odd couple of television news. Good night.
That's Channel 4 News. Good evening.